Hi, my name is Evelyn Harper, and I'm 67. For most of my life, I thought I understood family, loyalty, and what it meant to give without expecting much in return. I had a quiet life after my husband passed my home. My memories, my little routines that made each day feel peaceful. But a few months ago, everything changed, and I realized just how fragile that sense of security could be. It started one ordinary Tuesday morning when my son, Daniel, and his wife, Jennifer, were in my kitchen. I could sense the tension before they even spoke. I remember feeling a jolt, the kind that makes your chest tighten. Jennifer acted as if she owned the place, moving around with that casual confidence some people have when they feel untouchable. And then she said it. The words that felt like a punch to my chest if I didn't like living with them. I was free to leave. I remember standing there, my mind racing. I thought about the months they had been living under my roof, the so-called temporary arrangement that had stretched far beyond what I ever imagined. I thought about the meals, the empty promises, and the quiet invasions of my space. And yet, even in that moment, I felt a spark of clarity. Something inside me shifted. For the first time in months, I wasn't just the accommodating mother, the widow quietly absorbing the chaos around her. I was aware, alert, and starting to understand that perhaps I didn't have to accept this, that perhaps I had more control than I had been giving myself credit for. I began to notice the details, the way Jennifer's eyes darted when I looked at her, the small, unspoken challenges in Daniel's posture. And I realized that I could either let them walk over me, or I could start thinking carefully, planning quietly. This was the first day I began to reclaim my house, my life, and my dignity. Little did I know, this confrontation was just the opening act. By the end of this story, I would uncover secrets that went far beyond my kitchen. Secrets that would change everything I thought I knew about my family and about trust. And so, I want you to imagine for a moment being in my shoes, standing in your own home, realizing that someone you trusted might not be who you thought they were. That feeling, that weight, is where my story begins. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs the day Daniel and Jennifer arrived at my door. They came with 2 small suitcases, smiling, calling it a temporary arrangement while Daniel searched for a new job. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to think that family meant honesty, and that temporary truly meant just a few weeks. But over the months, that temporary stay stretched into 8 long months, and I realized how easily good intentions could be taken for granted. At first, I tried to remind myself to be patient. Daniel had always been my son, my little boy who grew up so polite and kind. But slowly, I started noticing the patterns. Jennifer, with her designer coffee and constant scrolling on her phone, seemed to invest more in vacations and online shopping than in contributing to our home. And Daniel, he claimed to be searching for jobs, but most of his energy seemed directed toward the couch and my refrigerator. I remember the sting each time I realized the groceries I bought for my own household were quietly disappearing, day after day, without a word of thanks. I tried to speak up gently, testing the waters. I thought maybe if I reminded Daniel that 8 months was long for a temporary stay, he would understand. But Daniel just brushed it off, insisting everything was fine, that we all were contributing. The word felt like a cruel joke in my ears. They hadn't paid a cent for rent, utilities, or groceries. Their contributions were minimal, almost invisible. Then there were the little audacities that kept piling up. The vacation photos from Cancun that Jennifer had posted, taken with my credit card, felt like a personal betrayal. I could feel my chest tighten every time I glanced at them. And the way Daniel silently allowed it all, never defending me, only made me question what kind of respect remained in this home that I had worked a lifetime to create. It was the combination of small irritations that built a quiet storm inside me. The subtle insults, the entitlement, the blatant disregard for my home and my efforts. It was exhausting. And yet I still tried to be the polite, accommodating mother-in-law. But I started noticing the cracks in their facade. Jennifer's eyes, cold and calculating, often betrayed impatience. Daniel's smiles began to feel forced, like he was constantly measuring what to say or do around his wife. One Tuesday morning, when the irritation had peaked, I felt something shift inside me. The old Evelyn, the one who would apologize for being inconvenienced, who would quietly bend over backward, was nowhere to be found. I started thinking about all the things I had allowed, all the small ways I had let my kindness be exploited. And in that moment, I realized that maybe I didn't have to accept it anymore. I began to observe carefully, taking mental notes. I paid attention to Jennifer's movements, the patterns in Daniel's excuses, the moments when their behavior slipped into entitlement. I could see the plan forming in my mind, not a plan for revenge. Not yet. But a way to protect my home, my space, my life. I knew I had to be strategic. I had to be calm, deliberate. And it was during one of these quiet observations that Jennifer once again let her audacity shine through, telling me, without shame, that if I didn't like living with them, I could always leave. I remember the cold weight of those words settling over me. It was almost as if she had tested me, waiting to see if I would shrink away. But instead of fear, I felt clarity. That sentence, that challenge, became the spark I needed. I knew, in that moment, that my next moves would set the stage for a confrontation that could not be ignored. I had to gather myself, think carefully, and act, not recklessly, not out of anger, but with precision. It was the first step in realizing that I had agency, that I had the power to reclaim my home and, in some small way, restore the respect that had been stripped away over these months. As I stood there, reflecting on the months of passive allowance, I understood that family dynamics were not always simple, not always fair. And I wondered how many of us silently accept being taken for granted, thinking patience and kindness are enough, only to feel the weight of betrayal building quietly inside. I had to be ready, because soon the moment would come to test the boundaries I had long neglected to enforce. Little did I know, the confrontation that would follow in my own kitchen would not only reveal the truth about Jennifer and Daniel, but also expose a deeper, more dangerous web of deception I had never imagined. I remember the exact moment when something inside me finally snapped. Standing in my kitchen, seeing Jennifer so confident and entitled, I felt a mix of disbelief and resolve. All the months of patience, all the quiet concessions, had led to this tipping point. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to just endure. I could act, and I could do it calmly, deliberately, without letting anger cloud my judgment. I began by observing everything, noticing the subtle ways Jennifer flaunted her lack of contribution, how Daniel avoided any confrontation, and how their confidence relied on my hesitation. And then, I started recording our interactions, not out of paranoia, but because I knew that clear evidence could be my shield and my leverage. I felt the familiar rush of control return, the understanding that knowledge could be power. When the moment came to act, I walked upstairs and began packing their belongings, not aggressively, not with rage, but with quiet precision. Their luxury clothes, handbags, even Daniel's gaming devices went into the suitcase as I reflected on how they had treated my home, my generosity, and my trust. Jennifer's shocked reactions didn't intimidate me. They confirmed how much she had underestimated me. As she scrambled to call the authorities, I remained composed, marveling at the audacity it must have taken to plan this confrontation. I could feel the tension building around us, the silent judgment in Daniel's eyes as he realized I wasn't the woman who would apologize or back down this time. I held the knowledge that I was still in my house, that every action I was taking was within my rights, and yet I knew the stakes were higher than mere domestic conflict. Then came the surprise twist: the man at the door claiming to be my doctor. At first, I felt a flicker of doubt. Was I missing something? But the more I observed, the more I realized this was another layer of manipulation. Jennifer had planned this, orchestrated it to make me appear unstable. I could see how carefully every element had been staged, from the false concern in her eyes to the timing of the so-called emergency. Even in the face of this deception, I felt a strange clarity. I reminded myself that I had lived a full life, made thoughtful decisions, and had the support of my own reasoning and instincts. I wasn't powerless. In fact, the realization that they had underestimated my awareness made me feel almost invincible. In those moments, I learned something crucial about boundaries and self-respect. I had been pushed, provoked, and manipulated, but I had the choice to respond strategically, with foresight and calm. And as I continued to pack, to observe, and to remain composed, I knew the game had shifted. I wasn't just defending my home anymore. I was setting the stage for justice that went far beyond this kitchen. I could feel the story unfolding in real time, and I knew that the next moves would determine not just who controlled the household, but who would ultimately emerge with dignity, safety, and the truth on their side. The more I paid attention, the more I started noticing patterns that didn't make sense. Jennifer's confidence, the way she had prepared for that confrontation, it all pointed to a plan far bigger than simply arguing over rent or groceries. My instincts told me something deeper was happening, something dangerous, and I knew I had to uncover the full picture before it was too late. I began quietly piecing together the clues, the inconsistencies in her stories, the way she had manipulated Daniel without him fully realizing it. Even the timing of Dr. Cooper's arrival, it all suggested premeditation. And then I discovered her history: marriages to older men who had passed unexpectedly, often shortly after leaving her significant assets. The coincidences were too glaring to ignore. Each detail I uncovered made the picture clearer and more chilling. Working with my attorney, Margaret Chen, I started connecting the dots. Jennifer wasn't just opportunistic, she was methodical. She had been practicing a pattern of predatory behavior across multiple states, enlisting fake professionals to claim that their victims were unstable, then seizing control of assets. The enormity of it stunned me. I realized that what had happened in my own kitchen was just one small part of a much larger criminal operation, a network that preyed on vulnerable seniors who had no one to stand up for them. I felt a mix of fear and determination. I couldn't undo the past, but I could make sure that I didn't become another statistic. I knew I needed evidence, strategy, and patience. That meant recording, observing, and collaborating with law enforcement to expose not just Jennifer, but everyone involved. Every call, every visit, every small interaction became a chance to confirm suspicions, to gather proof. The most unsettling part was understanding how carefully they had orchestrated their plan. Jennifer had studied me, my routines, my family dynamics, and even my vulnerabilities. She had expected me to falter, to question my own sanity. But I refused to be trapped. Each revelation strengthened my resolve. I thought about all the other seniors who might have been caught in similar webs of deceit, and I felt a surge of purpose. By the time I was fully aware of the network's reach, I knew that this was no longer just about reclaiming my home. This was about justice, protection, and ensuring that no one else would fall victim to their manipulations. I felt a quiet power in knowing I could act deliberately, with intelligence and preparation, instead of letting fear dictate my choices. And so I began to plan, carefully, methodically. I knew the next steps had to be precise. I couldn't rush. I had to wait for the right moment to catch them off guard, to ensure the truth would be undeniable. The story that began with a single sentence in my kitchen, the one about leaving if I didn't like living with them, had unfolded into a mission that would expose deception, protect the innocent, and restore balance to my life. As I reflected on all of this, I felt the weight of responsibility, but also a quiet thrill. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting. I was taking control. I wasn't just defending myself. I was preparing to uncover a web of lies that had hurt countless others. And in that resolve, I found clarity, courage, and a renewed sense of purpose. The day of the final confrontation, I felt a strange mixture of nerves and calm. I knew that everything I had prepared, every recording, every careful observation, would be tested. I reminded myself that I had taken the time to think through each step, to act deliberately rather than react emotionally. I wasn't alone. Agent Mitchell and my attorney were guiding every move, but in my heart, I knew I had to stay focused. When Robert Davidson arrived, posing as a financial advisor, I studied him quietly, noticing every detail: his polished appearance, the careful way he placed his briefcase, the calm assurance he projected. It was almost impressive. If it weren't so sinister, I could feel the weight of the moment, knowing that my life, my assets, and the safety of other victims depended on my composure. As he began explaining the asset protection process, I carefully observed his words, noticing the gaps in logic and the subtle pressure tactics. Every hesitation I feigned, every question I asked, was part of a strategy to reveal the truth. I kept in mind the recordings, the hidden cameras, the careful monitoring by the agents outside. Each step brought clarity: this man was about to be exposed, and I was the instrument. In those moments, I reflected on Jennifer's pattern, the manipulation that had infiltrated my home, and how she had tried to use my son's loyalty against me. I realized that Daniel had been a victim too, caught in her web without fully understanding it. That thought gave me patience, a sense of calm as I navigated the confrontation, choosing words and questions that would corner him without appearing aggressive. The moment of revelation came as planned. Robert Davidson's composure faltered when my questions revealed inconsistencies, and I felt the satisfaction of watching carefully laid plans unravel. Agent Mitchell and the team moved in, reading him his rights, and I realized how much power comes from preparation, observation, and calm decisiveness. Jennifer and Robert's schemes were collapsing, and the relief was profound. Afterwards, I sat quietly in my living room, processing everything. Daniel approached, remorse and disbelief in his eyes. We had a long conversation, not about blame, but about understanding, boundaries, and trust. I could see the weight of realization on him, and I knew this experience would forever change the way we approached family, honesty, and respect. In that quiet reflection, I felt a sense of victory that went beyond just reclaiming my home or protecting my assets. I had stood firm, remained clear-headed, and acted with integrity under pressure. And I thought about the other victims, those who had been less fortunate, and felt a renewed sense of purpose to use this experience to protect others, to be vigilant, and to remember that courage often comes quietly, in deliberate choices rather than loud declarations. I realized then that standing up for yourself doesn't always require confrontation in the traditional sense. Sometimes it's about preparation, clarity, and refusing to let fear dictate your actions. And in that, I felt not just relief, but pride, knowing that I had helped stop a dangerous network and restored a sense of justice that had been stolen. As I watched the last of the agents leave, I reflected on how fragile trust can be, how easily it can be exploited, and yet how powerful it can feel when it is reclaimed thoughtfully and intentionally. I knew that this story, my story, was far from ordinary, and I hoped that anyone listening could take a small lesson from it. Vigilance, courage, and the willingness to protect yourself are gifts worth nurturing. Sitting in my garden with a warm cup of tea, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The storm that had invaded my life over the past months was settling, and I felt a quiet sense of relief I hadn't known in a long time. Jennifer had been removed from my home. Robert Davidson and his network were in custody, and the truth was finally on my side. But more than that, I felt the deeper satisfaction of having reclaimed my sense of self, my boundaries, and my dignity. Daniel approached slowly, a mix of guilt and gratitude in his eyes. He admitted that he had been blind to Jennifer's manipulation, caught between loyalty to his wife and the love he had for me. I realized that he had been a victim in his own way, unprepared for the deceit surrounding him. I could see his remorse, and I felt the tenderness of a mother who loved her child even when he had faltered. I reassured him gently, letting him know that forgiveness was possible, but that respect and awareness were non-negotiable. I also thought about the other victims, the seniors who had been targeted by Jennifer and her accomplices across the country. Some had been placed in facilities under false pretenses, their life savings drained while families were deceived or complicit. The scope was staggering, and I felt a profound sense of responsibility. By standing firm, by trusting my instincts, and by collaborating with law enforcement, I had helped expose a network that preyed on the vulnerable. That realization brought both humility and pride. As I reflected, I noticed the simple pleasures around me, the way sunlight filtered through the leaves, the gentle hum of birds, the comforting routine of my home restored to order. I understood then that life could be unpredictable and sometimes unfair, but resilience and careful attention could turn vulnerability into strength. Standing firm, even when it felt daunting, allowed me to reclaim my narrative and protect not only myself, but others who might have been trapped in similar situations. This experience taught me about the importance of vigilance, the value of preparation, and the quiet courage it takes to act with both clarity and patience. I realized that bravery doesn't always mean confrontation with anger. Often, it means observing, understanding, and waiting for the right moment to assert yourself decisively. And sometimes it means knowing that help and support are essential, that working with those who can guide and protect you doesn't diminish your strength, it amplifies it. Finally, I felt a sense of closure that had nothing to do with restitution or justice, and everything to do with reclaiming my life. I was no longer the woman who let others dictate the terms of her home and her trust. I was Evelyn Harper, a grandmother, a mother, a widow, and a woman who had learned that her voice, her instincts, and her choices mattered profoundly. To anyone listening, I hope my story reminds you that you are never powerless, even in the face of betrayal or manipulation. There is strength in awareness, in careful planning, and in trusting your own judgment. Protect yourself, set boundaries, and remember that courage often comes quietly but decisively. If my story resonates with you, share your experiences, leave a comment, and know that your voice matters. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is refuse to be a victim and claim the life we deserve.